Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 13. Tea and Tennis. "Met the professor's late boatman on the Cobb," said Mr. Chase, dissecting a chocolate cake. "Clumsy man," said Phyllis. "I hope he was ashamed of himself. I shall never forgive him for trying to drown Papa." My heart bled for Mr. Henry Hawke, that modern martyr. "When I met him," said Tom Chase, "he looked as if he had been trying to drown his sorrow as well." "I knew he drank," said Phyllis severely, "the very first time I saw him." "You might have warned the professor," murmured Mr. Chase. "He couldn't have upset the boat if he had been sober." "You never know. He may have done it on purpose." "Tom, how absurd." "Rather rough on the man, aren't you?" I said. "Merely a suggestion," continued Mr. Chase airily. "I've been reading sensational novels lately, and it seems to me that Mr. Hawke's cut out to be a minion. Probably some secret foe of the professor's bribed him." My heart stood still. Did he know, I wondered, and was this all a roundabout way of telling me he knew? "The professor may be a member of an anarchist league or something, and this is punishment for refusing to assassinate some sportsman." "Have another cup of tea, Tom, and stop talking nonsense." Mr. Chase handed in his cup. "What gave me the idea that the upset was done on purpose was this. I saw the whole thing from the Wear Cliff. The spill looked to me just like dozens I had seen at Malta." "Why do they upset themselves on purpose at Malta particularly?" inquired Phyllis. "Listen carefully, my dear, and you'll know more about the ways of the Navy that guards your coast than you did before. When men are allowed on shore at Malta, the owner has a fancy to see them snugly on board again at a certain reasonable hour. After that hour, any Maltese policeman who brings them aboard gets 1 sovereign, cash. But he has to do all the bringing part of it on his own. Consequence is, you see, boats rowing out to the ship, carrying men who have overstayed their leave. And when they get near enough, the able-bodied gentleman in custody jumps to his feet, upsets the boat, and swims for the gangway. The policemen, if they aren't drowned, they sometimes are, race him, and whichever gets there first wins. If it's the policeman, he gets his sovereign. If it's the sailor, he is considered to have arrived not in a state of custody and gets off easier." What a judicious remark that was of the governor of North Carolina to the governor of South Carolina respecting the length of time between drinks. "Just one more cup, please, Phyllis." "But how does all that apply?" I asked, dry-mouthed. "Mr. Hawke upset the professor just as those Maltese were upset. There's a patent way of doing it. Furthermore, by judicious questioning, I found that Hawke was once in the Navy and stationed at Malta. Now, who's going to drag in Sherlock Holmes?" "You don't really think," I said, feeling like a criminal in the dock when the case is going against him. "I think friend Hawke has been reenacting the joys of his vanished youth, so to speak." "He ought to be prosecuted," said Phyllis, blazing with indignation. "Alas, poor Hawke." "Nobody safe with a man of that sort hiring out a boat." "Oh, miserable Hawke." "But why on earth should he play a trick like that on Professor Derrick, Chase?" "Pure animal spirits, probably. Or he may, as I say, be a minion." I was hot all over. "I shall tell Father that," said Phyllis in her most decided voice, "and see what he says. I don't wonder at the man taking to drink after doing such a thing." I think you're making a mistake," I said. "I never make mistakes," Mr. Chase replied. "I am called Archibald the All-Right, for I am infallible. I propose to keep a reflective eye upon the jovial Hawke." He helped himself to another section of the chocolate cake. "Haven't you finished yet, Tom?" inquired Phyllis. "I'm sure Mr. Garnett's getting tired of sitting talking here," she said. I shot out a polite negative. Mr. Chase explained with his mouth full that he had by no means finished. Chocolate cake, it appeared, was the dream of his life. When at sea, he was accustomed to lie awake o' nights thinking of it. "You don't seem to realize," he said, "that I have just come from a cruise on a torpedo boat. There was such a sea on as a rule that cooking operations were entirely suspended, and we lived on ham and sardines, without bread." "How horrible!" "On the other hand," added Mr. Chase philosophically, "it didn't matter much, because we were all ill most of the time." "Don't be nasty, Tom." "I was merely defending myself. I hope Mr. Hawke will be able to do as well when his turn comes. My aim, my dear Phyllis, is to show you in a series of impressionist pictures the sort of thing I have to go through when I'm not here. Then perhaps you won't rend me so savagely over a matter of 5 minutes' lateness for breakfast." 5 minutes? It was 3/4 of an hour, and everything was simply frozen. "Quite right, too, in weather like this. You're a slave to convention, Phyllis. You think breakfast ought to be hot, so you always have it hot. On occasion I prefer mine cold. Mine is the truer wisdom. You can give the cook my compliments, Phyllis, and tell her, gently, for I don't wish the glad news to overwhelm her, that I enjoyed the cake. Say that I shall be glad to hear from her again. Care for a game of tennis, Garnet?" "What a pity Nora isn't here," said Phyllis. "We could have had a 4. "But she is at present wasting her sweetness on the desert air of Yeovil. You had better sit down and watch us, Phyllis. Tennis in this sort of weather is no job for the delicately nurtured feminine. I will explain the finer points of my game as we go on. Look out particularly for the Tilden backhanded slosh, a winner every time." We proceeded to the tennis court. I played with the sun in my eyes. I might, if I chose, emphasize that fact and attribute my subsequent rout to it, adding, by way of solidifying the excuse, that I was playing on a strange court with a borrowed racket, and that my mind was preoccupied, firstly with l'affaire Hawke, secondly, and chiefly, with the gloomily thought that Phyllis and my opponent seemed to be on friendly terms with each other. Their manner at tea had been almost that of an engaged couple. There was a thorough understanding between them. I will not, however, take refuge behind excuses. I admit, without qualifying the statement, that Mr. Chase was too good for me. I had always been under the impression that lieutenants in the Royal Navy were not brilliant at tennis. I had met them at various houses, and they had never shone conspicuously. They had played an earnest, unobtrusive game, and generally seemed glad when it was over. Mr. Chase was not of this sort. His service was bottled lightning. His returns behaved like jumping crackers. He won the first game in precisely 6 strokes. He served. Only once did I take the service with the full face of the racket, and then I seemed to be stopping a bullet. I returned it into the net. The last of the series struck the wooden edge of my racket and soared over the back net into the shrubbery, after the manner of a snick to long slip off a fast bowler. "Game," said Mr. Chase. "We'll look for that afterwards." I felt a worm and no man. Phyllis, I thought, would probably judge my entire character from this exhibition. A man, she would reflect, who could be so feeble and miserable a failure at tennis could not be good for much in any department of life. She would compare me instinctively with my opponent, and contrast his dash and brilliance with my own inefficiency. Somehow the massacre was beginning to have a bad effect on my character. All my self-respect was ebbing. A little more of this, and I should become crushed, a mere human jelly. It was my turn to serve. Service is my strong point at tennis. I am inaccurate but vigorous, and occasionally send in a quite unplayable shot. 1 or 2 of these, even at the expense of a fault or so, and I might be permitted to retain at least a portion of my self-respect. I opened with a couple of faults. The sight of Phyllis, sitting calm and cool in her chair under the cedar, unnerved me. I served another fault, and yet another. "Here, I say, Garnet," observed Mr. Chase plaintively. "Do put me out of this hideous suspense. I'm becoming a mere bundle of quivering ganglions." I loathe facetiousness in moments of stress. I frowned austerely, made no reply, and served another fault, my fifth. Matters had reached a crisis. Even if I had to lob it underhand, I must send the ball over the net with the next stroke. I restrained myself this time, eschewing the careless vigor which had marked my previous efforts. The ball flew in a slow semicircle and pitched inside the correct court. At least, I told myself, I had not served a fault. What happened then, I cannot exactly say. I saw my opponent spring forward like a panther and whirl his racket. The next moment, the back net was shaking violently, and the ball was rolling swiftly along the ground on a return journey to the other court. "Love 40, said Mr. Chase. "Phyllis." "Yes." "That was the Tilden slosh." "I thought it must be," said Phyllis. In the third game, I managed to score 15. By the merest chance, I returned one of his red-hot serves, and, probably through surprise, he failed to send it back again. In the fourth and fifth games, I omitted to score. Phyllis had left the cedar now, and was picking flowers from the beds behind the court. We began the sixth game, and now, for some reason, I played really well. I struck a little vein of brilliance. I was serving, and this time a proportion of my serves went over the net instead of trying to get through. The score went from 15 all to 40-15. Hope began to surge through my veins. If I could keep this up, I might win yet. The Tilden slosh diminished my lead by 15. Then I got in a really fine serve, which beat him. Vantage in, another slosh. Deuce, another slam. Vantage out. It was an awesome moment. There was a tide in the affairs of men, which, taken by the flood, I served. Fault. I served again. A beauty. He returned it like a flash into the corner of the court. With a supreme effort, I got to it. We rallied. I was playing like a professor. Then whiz! The slosh had beaten me on the post. "Game and," said Mr. Chase, tossing his racket into the air and catching it by the handle. "Good game, that last one." I turned to see what Phyllis thought of it. At the 11th hour I had shown her of what stuff I was made. She had disappeared. "Looking for Miss Derrick?" said Chase, jumping the net and joining me in my court. "She's gone into the house." "When did she go?" "At the end of the fifth game," said Chase. "Gone to dress for dinner, I suppose," he continued. "It must be getting late. I think I ought to be going too, if you don't mind. The professor gets a little restive if I keep him waiting for his daily bread. Great Scott! That watch can't be right. What do you make of it?" "Yes, so do I. I really think I must run. You won't mind. Good night, then. See you tomorrow, I hope." I walked slowly out across the fields. That same star, in which I had confided on a former occasion, was at its post. It looked placid and cheerful. It never got beaten by 6 games to love under the very eyes of a lady star. It was never cut out ignominiously by infernally capable lieutenants in His Majesty's Navy. No wonder it was cheerful. End of chapter 13. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 14. A Council of War. "The fact is," said Ugridge, "if things go on as they are now, my lad, we shall be in the cart. This business wants bucking up. We don't seem to be making any headway. Why it is, I don't know, but we are not making headway. Of course, what we want is time. If only these scoundrels of tradesmen would leave us alone for a spell, we could get things going properly. But we're hampered and rattled and worried all the time, aren't we, Milly?" "Yes, dear." "You don't let me see the financial side of the thing enough," I complained. "Why don't you keep me thoroughly posted? I didn't know we were in such a bad way. The fowls look fit enough, and Edwin hasn't had one for a week." "Edwin knows as well as possible when he's done wrong, Mr. Garnet," said Mrs. Ukridge. "He was so sorry after he had killed those other two." "Yes," said Ukridge, "I saw to that." "As far as I can see," I continued, "we are going strong. Chicken for breakfast, lunch, and dinner is a shade monotonous, perhaps, but look at the business we're doing. We sold a whole heap of eggs last week." "But not enough, Garney, old man. We aren't making our presence felt. England isn't ringing with our name. We sell a dozen eggs where we ought to be selling them by the 100, carting them off in trucks for the London market and congesting the traffic. Harrods and Whiteleys and the rest of them are beginning to get on their hind legs and talk. That's what they're doing. Devilish unpleasant they're making themselves. You see, laddie, there's no denying it. We did touch them for the deuce of a lot of things on account, and they agreed to take it out in eggs. All they've done so far is to take it out in apologetic letters from Milly. Now, I don't suppose there's a woman alive who can write a better apologetic letter than her nibs, but if you're broad-minded and can face facts, you can't help seeing that the juiciest apologetic letter is not an egg. I meant to say, look at it from their point of view. Harrod, or Whiteley, comes into his store in the morning, rubbing his hands expectantly. "Well," he says, "how many eggs from Combe Regis today?" And instead of leading him off to a corner piled up with bursting crates, they show him a 4-page letter telling him it'll all come right in the future. I've never run a store myself, but I should think that would jar a chap. Anyhow, the blighters seem to be getting tired of waiting. "The last letter from Harrod's was quite pathetic," said Mrs. Ukridge sadly. I had a vision of an eggless London. I seemed to see homes rendered desolate, and lives embittered by the slump, and millionaires bidding against one another for the few rare specimens which Ukridge had actually managed to dispatch to Brompton and Bayswater. Ukridge, having induced himself to be broad-minded for 5 minutes, now began to slip back to his own personal point of view and became once more the man with a grievance. His fleeting sympathy with the wrongs of Mr. Harrod and Mr. Whiteley disappeared. "What it all amounts to," he said complainingly, "is that they're infernally unreasonable. I've done everything possible to meet them. Nothing could have been more manly and straightforward than my attitude. I told them in my last letter but 3 that I proposed to let them have the eggs on the Times installment system, and they said I was frivolous. They said that to send 13 eggs as payment for goods supplied to the value of £25 1 shilling 8½d was mere trifling. Trifling, I'll trouble you. That's the spirit in which they meet my suggestions. It was Harrod who did that. I've never met Harrod personally, but I'd like to, just to ask him if that's his idea of cementing amiable business relations. He knows just as well as anyone else that without credit, commerce has no elasticity. It's an elementary rule. I'll bet he'd have been sick if chappies had refused to let him have tick when he was starting his store. Do you suppose Harrod, when he started in business, paid cash down on the nail for everything? Not a bit of it. He went about taking people by the coat button and asking them to be good chaps and wait till Wednesday week. Trifling. Why, those 13 eggs were absolutely all we had over after Mrs. Beale had taken what she wanted for the kitchen. As a matter of fact, If it's anybody's fault, it's Mrs. Beale's. That woman literally eats eggs." "The habit is not confined to her," I said. "Well, what I mean to say is, she seems to bathe in them." "She says she needs so many for puddings, dear," said Mrs. Ukridge. "I spoke to her about it yesterday, and, of course, we often have omelettes." "She can't make omelettes without breaking eggs," I urged. "She can't make them without breaking us, damn it," said Ukridge. "1 or 2 more omelettes, and we're done for. No fortune on earth could stand it. We mustn't have any more omelettes, Milly. We must economize. Millions of people get on all right without omelettes. I suppose there are families where if you suddenly produce an omelette, the whole strength of the company would get up and cheer, led by father. Cancel the omelettes, old girl, from now onward." "Yes, dear, but—" "Well?" "I don't think Mrs. Beale would like that very much, dear. She has been complaining a good deal about chicken at every meal. She says that the omelettes are the only things that give her a chance. She says there are always possibilities in an omelette." "In short," I said, "what you propose to do is deliberately to remove from this excellent lady's life the one remaining element of poetry. You mustn't do it. Give Mrs. Beale her omelettes, and let's hope for a larger supply of eggs." "Another thing," said Ukridge. "It isn't only that there's a shortage of eggs. That wouldn't matter so much if only we kept hatching our fresh squads of chickens. I'm not saying the hens aren't doing their best. I take off my hat to the hens. As nice a hard-working lot as I ever want to meet, full of vigor and earnestness. It's that damned incubator that's letting us down all the time. The rotten thing won't work. I don't know what's the matter with it. The long and the short of it is, it simply declines to incubate." "Perhaps it's your dodge of letting down the temperature. You remember, you were telling me? I forget the details." "My dear old boy," he said earnestly, "there's nothing wrong with my figures. It's a mathematical certainty. What's the good of mathematics if not to help you work out that sort of thing? No, there's something deuced wrong with the machine itself, and I shall probably make a complaint to the people I got it from. Where did we get the incubator, old girl?" "Harrod's, I think, dear. Yes, it was Harrod's. It came down with the first lot of things." "Then," said Ukridge, banging the table with his fist while his glasses flashed triumph, "we've got 'em. The Lord has delivered Harrod's into our hand. Write and answer that letter of theirs tonight, Milly. Sit on them." "Yes, dear." "Tell 'em that we'd have sent them their confounded eggs long ago, if only their rotten 2-penny halfpenny incubator had worked with any approach to decency." He paused. "Or would you be sarcastic, Garney, old horse? No, better put it so that they'll understand. Say that I consider that the manufacturer of the thing ought to be in Colney Hatch, if he isn't there already, and that they are scoundrels for palming off a groggy machine of that sort on me." "The ceremony of opening the morning's letters at Harrod's ought to be full of interest and excitement tomorrow," I said. This dashing counterstroke seemed to relieve Ukridge. His pessimism vanished. He seldom looked on the dark side of things for long at a time. He began now to speak hopefully of the future. He planned out ingenious improvements. Our fowls were to multiply so rapidly and consistently that within a short space of time Dorsetshire would be paved with them. Our eggs were to increase in size till they broke records and got 3-line notices in the items of interest column in the Daily Mail. Briefly, each hen was to become a happy combination of rabbit and ostrich. "There is certainly a good time coming," I said. "May it be soon. Meanwhile, what of the local tradesmen?" Ukridge relapsed once more into gloom. "They are the worst of the lot. I don't mind the London people so much. They only write, and a letter or two hurts nobody. But when it comes to butchers and bakers and grocers and fishmongers and fruiterers and what-not coming up to one's house and dunning one in one's own garden, well, it's a little hard, what?" "Oh, then those fellows I found you talking to yesterday were duns? I thought they were farmers, come to hear your views on the rearing of poultry." "Which were they? Little chap with black whiskers and long, thin man with beard?" "That was Dawlish the grocer, and Curtis the fishmonger. The others had gone before you came." It may be wondered why, before things came to such a crisis, I had not placed my balance at the bank at the disposal of the senior partner for use on behalf of the farm. The fact was that my balance was at the moment small. I have not yet, in the course of this narrative, gone into my pecuniary position, but I may state here that it was an inconvenient one. It was big with possibilities, but of ready cash there was but a meagre supply. My parents had been poor, but I had a wealthy uncle. Uncles are notoriously careless of the comfort of their nephews. Mine was no exception. He had views. He was a great believer in matrimony, as, having married 3 wives, not simultaneously, he had every right to be. He was also of opinion that the less money the young bachelor possessed, the better. The consequence was that he announced his intention of giving me a handsome allowance from the day that I married, but not an instant before. Till that glad day I would have to shift for myself. And I am bound to admit that, for an uncle, it was a remarkably sensible idea. I am also of the opinion that it is greatly to my credit, and a proof of my pure and unmercenary nature, that I did not instantly put myself up to be raffled for, or rush out into the streets and propose marriage to the first lady I met. But I was making quite enough with my pen to support myself, and, be it never so humble, there is something pleasant in a bachelor existence. Or so I had thought until very recently. I had thus no great stake in Eucridge's chicken farm. I had contributed a modest £5 to the preliminary expenses, and another 5 after the roup incident. But further I could not go with safety. When his income is dependent on the whims of editors and publishers, the prudent man keeps something up his sleeve against a sudden slump in his particular wares. I did not wish to have to make a hurried choice between matrimony and the workhouse. Having exhausted the subject of finance, or rather, when I began to feel that it was exhausting me, I took my clubs and strolled up the hill to the links to play off a match with a sportsman from the village. I had entered some days previously for a competition for a trophy. I quote the printed notice, presented by a local supporter of the game, in which, up to the present, I was getting on nicely. I had survived 2 rounds, and expected to beat my present opponent, which would bring me into the semi-final. Unless I had bad luck, I felt that I ought to get into the final and win it. As far as I could gather from watching the play of my rivals, the professor was the best of them, and I was convinced that I should have no difficulty with him. But he had the most extraordinary luck at golf, though he never admitted it. He also exercised quite an uncanny influence on his opponent. I have seen men put completely off their stroke by his good fortune. I disposed of my man without difficulty. We parted a little coldly. He had decapitated his brassy on the occasion of his striking Dorsetshire instead of his ball, and he was slow in recovering from the complex emotions which such an episode induces. In the clubhouse I met the professor, whose demeanor was a welcome contrast to that of my late opponent. The professor had just routed his opponent, and so won through to the semi-final. He was warm, but jubilant. I congratulated him and left the place. Phyllis was waiting outside. She often went round the course with him. "Good afternoon," I said. "Have you been round with the professor?" "Yes. We must have been in front of you. Father won his match." "So he was telling me. I was very glad to hear it." "Did you win, Mr. Garnet?" "Yes, pretty easily. My opponent had bad luck all through. Bunkers seemed to have a magnetic attraction for him." So you and Father are both in the semi-final. I hope you will play very badly." "Thank you," I said. "Yes, it does sound rude, doesn't it? But Father has set his heart on winning this year. Do you know that he has played in the final round 2 years running now?" "Really? Both times he was beaten by the same man. Who was that? Mr. Derrick plays a much better game than anybody I have seen on these links." "It was nobody who is here now. It was a Colonel Jervis. He has not come to Combe Regis this year. That's why Father is hopeful." "Logically," I said, "he ought to be certain to win." "Yes, but you see, you were not playing last year, Mr. Garnet." "Oh, the Professor can make rings round me," I said. "What did you go round in today?" "We were playing match play, and only did the first dozen holes. But my average round is somewhere in the late 80s. "The best my father has ever done is 90, and that was only once. So you see, Mr. Garnet, there's going to be another tragedy this year." "You make me feel a perfect brute. But it's more than likely, you must remember, that I shall fail miserably if I ever do play your father in the final. There are days when I play golf as badly as I play tennis. You'll hardly believe me." She smiled reminiscently. "Tom is much too good at tennis. His service is perfectly dreadful." "It's a little terrifying on first acquaintance." "But you're better at golf than at tennis, Mr. Garnet. I wish you were not." "This is a special pleading," I said. "It isn't fair to appeal to my better feelings, Miss Derrick." "I didn't know golfers had any where golf was concerned. Do you really have your off days?" "Nearly always. There are days when I slice with my driver as if it were a bread knife." "Really?" "And when I couldn't putt to hit a haystack." "Then I hope it will be on one of those days that you play Father." "I hope so, too," I said. "You hope so?" "Yes." "But don't you want to win?" "I should prefer to please you." "Really? How very unselfish of you, Mr. Garnet," she replied, with a laugh. "I had no idea that such chivalry existed. I thought a golfer would sacrifice anything to win a game." "Most things." "And trample on the feelings of anybody." "Not everybody," I said. At this point, the Professor joined us. End of chapter 14. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 15. The Arrival of Nemesis. Some people do not believe in presentiments. They attribute that curious feeling that something unpleasant is going to happen to such mundane causes as liver, or a chill, or the weather. For my own part, I think there is more in the matter than the casual observer might imagine. I awoke 3 days after my meeting with the Professor at the clubhouse, filled with a dull foreboding. Somehow I seemed to know that the day was going to turn out badly for me. It may have been liver or a chill, but it was certainly not the weather. The morning was perfect, the most glorious of a glorious summer. There was a haze over the valley and out to sea which suggested a warm noon, when the sun should have begun the serious duties of the day. The birds were singing in the trees and breakfasting on the lawn, while Edwin, seated on one of the flower beds, watched them with the eye of a connoisseur. Occasionally, when a sparrow hopped in his direction, he would make a sudden spring, and the bird would fly away to the other side of the lawn. I had never seen Edwin catch a sparrow. I believe they looked on him as a bit of a crank, and humored him by coming within springing distance just to keep him amused. Dashing young cock-sparrows would show off before their particular hen-sparrows, and earn a cheap reputation for dare-devilry by going within so many years of Edwin's lair and then darting away. Bob was in his favourite place on the gravel. I took him with me down to the cob to watch me bathe. "What's the matter with me today, Robert, old son?" I asked him as I dried myself. He blinked lazily, but contributed no suggestion. "It's no good looking bored," I went on, "because I'm going to talk about myself, however much it bores you. Here am I, as fit as a prize-fighter, living in the open air for I don't know how long, eating good plain food, bathing every morning, sea bathing, mind you, and yet what's the result? I feel beastly." Bob yawned and gave a little whine. "Yes," I said, "I know I'm in love, but that can't be it, because I was in love just as much a week ago, and I felt all right then. But isn't she an angel, Bob, isn't she? And didn't you feel bucked when she patted you? Of course you did. Anybody would. But how about Tom Chase? Don't you think he's a dangerous man? He calls her by her Christian name, you know, and behaves generally as if she belonged to him. And he sees her every day, while I have to trust to meeting her at odd times. And then I generally feel such a fool I can't think of anything to talk about except golf and the weather. He probably sings duets with her after dinner, and you know what comes of duets after dinner." Here Bob, who had been trying for some time to find a decent excuse for getting away, pretended to see something of importance at the other end of the cob, and trotted off to investigate it, leaving me to finish dressing by myself. "Of course," I said to myself, "it may be merely hunger. I may be all right after breakfast. But at present I seem to be working up for a really fine fit of the blues. I feel bad." I whistled to Bob and started for home. On the beach I saw the professor some little distance away, and waved my towel in a friendly manner. He made no reply. Of course, it was possible that he had not seen me, but for some reason his attitude struck me as ominous. As far as I could see, he was looking straight at me, and he was not a short-sighted man. I could think of no reason why he should cut me. We had met on the links on the previous morning, and he had been friendliness itself. He had called me dear boy, supplied me with a gin and ginger beer at the clubhouse, and generally behaved as if he had been David and I Jonathan. Yet in certain moods we are inclined to make mountains out of molehills, and I went on my way, puzzled and uneasy, with a distinct impression that I had received the cut direct. I felt hurt. What had I done that Providence should make things so unpleasant for me? It would be a little hard, as Euclid would have said, if, after all my trouble, the professor had discovered some fresh grievance against me. Perhaps Euclid had been irritating him again. I wished he would not identify me so completely with Euclid. I could not be expected to control the man. Then I reflected that they could hardly have met in the few hours between my parting from the professor at the clubhouse and my meeting with him on the beach. Euclid rarely left the farm. When he was not working among the fowls, he was lying on his back in the paddock, resting his massive mind. I came to the conclusion that after all the professor had not seen me. "I'm an idiot, Bob," I said, as we turned in at the farm gate, and I let my imagination run away with me. Bob wagged his tail in approval of the sentiment. Breakfast was ready when I got in. There was a cold chicken on the sideboard, deviled chicken on the table, a trio of boiled eggs, and a dish of scrambled eggs. As regarded quantity, Mrs. Beale never failed us. Euclid was sorting the letters. "Morning, Garney," he said. "One for you, Milly." "It's from Aunt Elizabeth," said Mrs. Euclid, looking at the envelope. I had only heard casual mention of this relative hitherto, but I had built up a mental picture of her partly from remarks which Euclid had let fall, but principally from the fact that he had named the most malignant hen in our fowl run after her. A severe lady, I imagined, with a cold eye. "Wish she'd enclose a check," said Euclid. "She could spare it. You've no idea, Garney, old man, how disgustingly and indecently rich that woman is. She lives in Kensington on an income which would do her well in Park Lane. But as a touching proposition she had proved almost negligible. She steadfastly refuses to part. I think she would, dear, if she knew how much we needed it. But I don't like to ask her. She's so curious and says such horrid things. She does, agreed Eucridge gloomily. He spoke as one who had had experience. 2 for you, Garney. All the rest for me. 10 of them, and all bills. He spread the envelopes out on a table and drew one at a venture. Whiteley's, he said, getting jumpy. Are in receipt of my favour of the 7th instant, and are at a loss to understand it. It's rummy about these blighters, but they never seem able to understand a damn thing. It's hard. You put things in words of 1 syllable for them, and they just goggle and wonder what it all means. They want something on account. Upon my Sam, I'm disappointed with Whiteley's. I'd been thinking in rather a kindly spirit of them, and feeling that they were a more intelligent lot than Harrod's. I'd half a mind to give Harrod's the miss in baulk and hand my whole trade over to these fellows. But not now, dash it! Whiteley's have disappointed me. From the way they write, you'd think they thought I was doing it all for fun. How can I let them have their infernal money when there isn't any? Here's one from Dorchester. Smith, the chap we got the gramophone from, wants to know when I'm going to settle up for 16 records. Sordid brute! I wanted to get on with my own correspondence, but Eucridge held me with a glittering eye. The chicken men, the dealer people, you know, want me to pay for the first lot of hens. Considering that they all died of roup, and that I was going to send them back anyhow after I'd got them to hatch out a few chickens, I call that cool. I mean to say, business is business, but that's what these fellows don't seem to understand. I can't afford to pay enormous sums for birds which die off quicker than I can get them in. I shall never speak to Aunt Elizabeth again, said Mrs. Eucridge suddenly. She had dropped the letter she had been reading and was staring indignantly in front of her. There were 2 little red spots on her cheeks. "What's the matter, old chap?" inquired Eucridge affectionately, glancing up from his pile of bills and forgetting his own troubles in an instant. "Buck up. Aunt Elizabeth been getting on your nerves again? What's she been saying this time?" Mrs. Eucridge left the room with a sob. Eucridge sprang at the letter. "If that demon doesn't stop writing her infernal letters and upsetting Milly, I shall strangle her with my bare hands, regardless of her age and sex." He turned over the pages of the letter till he came to the passage which had caused the trouble. "Well, upon my Sam, listen to this, Garney, old horse. You tell me nothing regarding the success of this chicken farm of yours, and I confess that I find your silence ominous. You know my opinion of your husband. He is perfectly helpless in any matter requiring the exercise of a little common sense and business capability." He stared at me, amazed. "I like that. 'Pon my soul, this is really rich. I could have believed almost anything of that blighted female, but I did think she had a reasonable amount of intelligence. Why, you know that it's just in matters requiring common sense and business capability that I come out really strong." "Of course, old man," I replied dutifully, "the woman's a fool." "That's what she calls me 2 lines further on. No wonder Milly was upset. Why can't these cats leave people alone?" "Oh, woman, woman," I threw in helpfully. "Always interfering. Rotten. And backbiting. Awful. I shan't stand it. I shouldn't. Look here, on the next page she calls me a gaby." "It's time you took a strong line." "And in the very next sentence refers to me as a perfect guffin." "What's a guffin, Garney, old boy?" I considered the point. Broadly speaking, I should say one who guffs. I believe it's actionable. I shouldn't wonder. Eucridge rushed to the door. Millie! He slammed the door, and I heard him dashing upstairs. I turned to my letters. One was from Lickford, with a Cornish postmark. I glanced through it and laid it aside for a more exhaustive perusal. The other was in a strange handwriting. I looked at the signature. Patrick Derrick. This was queer. What had the professor to say to me? The next moment, my heart seemed to spring to my throat. Sir, the letter began. A pleasant, cheery opening. Then it got off the mark, so to speak, like lightning. There was no sparring for an opening, no dignified parade of set phrases leading up to the main point. It was the letter of a man who was almost too furious to write. It gave me the impression that if he had not written it, he would have been obliged to have taken some very violent form of exercise by way of relief to his soul. You will be good enough to look on our acquaintance as closed. I have no wish to associate with persons of your stamp. If we should happen to meet, you will be good enough to treat me as a total stranger, as I shall treat you. And, if I might be allowed to give you a word of advice, I should recommend you in future, when you wish to exercise your humour, to do so in some less practical manner than by bribing boatmen to upset your friends, crossed out thickly, and acquaintances substituted. If you require further enlightenment in this matter, the enclosed letter may be of service to you. With which he remained mine faithfully, Patrick Derrick. The enclosed letter was from one Jane Musprat. It was bright and interesting. Dear Sir, my Harry, Mr. Hawke, says to me how it was him upsetting the boat and you, not because he is not steady in a boat, which he is no man more so in Combe Regis, but because one of the gentlemen what keeps chickens up the hill, the little one, Mr. Garnick his name is, says to him, Hawke, I'll give you a sovereign to upset Mr. Derrick in your boat. And my Harry, being easily led, was took in and did. But he's sorry now, and wishes he hadn't, and says he'll never do a practical joke again for anyone, even for a banknote. Yours obediently, Jane Musprat. Oh, woman, woman. At the bottom of everything, history is full of tragedies caused by the lethal sex. Who cost Mark Antony the world? A woman. Who let Samson in so atrociously? Woman again. Why did Bill Bailey leave home? Once more, because of a woman. And here was I, Jerry Garnett, harmless, well-meaning writer of minor novels, going through the same old mill. I cursed Jane Musprat. What chance had I with Phyllis now? Could I hope to win over the professor again? I cursed Jane Musprat for the second time. My thoughts wandered to Mr. Harry Hawke. The villain, the scoundrel! What business had he to betray me? Well, I could settle with him. The man who lays a hand upon a woman, save in the way of kindness, is justly disliked by society. So the woman Musprat, culpable as she was safe from me. But what of the man Hawke? There no such consideration swayed me. I would interview the man Hawke. I would give him the most hectic 10 minutes of his career. I would say things to him the recollection of which would make him start up shrieking in his bed in the small hours of the night. I would arise and be a man and slay him. Take him grossly, full of bread, with all his crimes broad blown, as flush as May, at gaming, swearing, or about some act that had no relish of salvation in it. The demon! My life ruined. My future grey and black. My heart shattered. And why? Because of the scoundrel Hawke. Phyllis would meet me in the village, on the cob, on the links, and pass by as if I were the invisible man. And why? Because of the reptile hawk, the worm hawk, the dastard and varlet hawk. I crammed my hat on and hurried out of the house towards the village. End of chapter 15. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 16. A Chance Meeting. I roamed the place in search of the varlet for the space of half an hour, and, after having drawn all his familiar haunts, found him at length leaning over the sea-wall near the church, gazing thoughtfully into the waters below. I confronted him. "Well," I said, "you're a beauty, aren't you?" He eyed me owlishly. Even at this early hour I was grieved to see he showed signs of having looked on the bitter while it was brown. His eyes were filmy, and his manner aggressively solemn. "Beauty?" he echoed. "What have you got to say for yourself?" "Say for self." It was plain that he was engaged in pulling his faculties together by some laborious process known only to himself. At present, my words conveyed no meaning to him. He was trying to identify me. He had seen me before somewhere, he was certain, but he could not say where or who I was. "I want to know," I said, "what induced you to be such an abject idiot as to let our arrangements get known." I spoke quietly. I was not going to waste the choicer flowers of speech on a man who was incapable of understanding them. Later on, when he had awakened to a sense of his position, I would begin really to talk to him. He continued to stare at me. Then a sudden flash of intelligence lit up his features. "Mr. Garnick," he said at last. "From Chicken Farm," he continued, with the triumphant air of a cross-examining king's counsel who has at last got on the track. "Yes," I said. "Up top the hill," he proceeded, clinchingly. He stretched out a huge hand. "How you?" he inquired with a friendly grin. "I want to know," I said distinctly, "what you've got to say for yourself after letting our affair with the professor become public property." He paused a while in thought. "Dear sir," he said at last, as if he were dictating a letter, "Dear sir, I owe you He waved his hand as who should say, "It's a stiff job, but I'm going to do it." "Explation," he said. "You do," I said grimly. "I should like to hear it." "Dear sir, listen me." "Go on, then." "You came me. You said, 'Hawk, old friend, listen me. You tip this old bufflehead into water,' you said, 'and gormed if I don't give 'ee a pound note.' That's what you said me. Isn't that what you said me?" I did not deny it. "Very well, I said you. Right, I said. I tipped the old soul into water, and got the pound note." "Yes, you took care of that. All this is quite true. But it's beside the point. We're not disputing about what happened. What I want to know, for the third time, is what made you let the cat out of the bag. Why couldn't you keep quiet about it?" He waved his hand. "Dear sir," he replied, "this way. Listen me." It was a tragic story that he unfolded. My wrath ebbed as I listened. After all, the fellow was not so greatly to blame. I felt that in his place I should have acted as he had done. It was fate's fault, and fate's alone. It appeared that he had not come well out of the matter of the accident. I had not looked at it hitherto from his point of view. While the rescue had left me the popular hero, it had had quite the opposite result for him. He had upset his boat and would have drowned his passenger, said public opinion, if the young hero from London, myself, had not plunged in and at the risk of his life brought the professor ashore. Consequently, he was despised by all as an inefficient boatman. He became a laughing-stock. The local wags made laborious jests when he passed. They offered him fabulous sums to take their worst enemies out for a row with him. They wanted to know when he was going to school to learn his business. In fact, they behaved as wags do and always have done at all times all over the world. Now, all this, it seemed, Mr. Hawk would have borne cheerfully and patiently for my sake, or, at any rate, for the sake of my crisp pound note I had given him, but a fresh factor appeared in the problem, complicating it grievously. To wit, Miss Jane Musprat. "She said to me," explained Mr. Hawk with pathos, "Harry Hawk, she said, you'm a girt fool, and I don't marry no one as ain't to be trusted in a boat by hisself, and what has jokes made about him by that Tom Lee." "I punch Tom Lee," observed Mr. Hawk parenthetically. "So, she said me, you can go away, and I don't want to see you again." This heartless conduct on the part of Miss Musprat had had the natural result of making him confess in self-defense, and she had written to the professor the same night. I forgave Mr. Hawk. I think he was hardly sober enough to understand, for he betrayed no emotion. "It is fate, Hawk," I said, "simply fate. There is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough-hew them how we will, and it's no good grumbling." "Yes," said Mr. Hawk, after chewing this sentiment for a while in silence. "So she said me, Hawk, she said like that, you're a girt fool." "That's all right," I replied. "I quite understand. As I say, it's simply fate. Good-bye," and I left him. As I was going back, I met the professor and Phyllis. They passed me without a look. I wandered on in quite a fervour of self-pity. I was in one of those moods when life suddenly seems to become irksome, when the future stretches black and grey in front of me. I should have liked to have faded almost imperceptibly from the world, like Mr. Bardell, even if, as in his case, it had involved being knocked on the head with a pint pot in a public-house cellar. In such a mood it is imperative that one should seek distraction. The shining example of Mr. Harry Hawk did not lure me. Taking to drink would be a nuisance. Work was what I wanted. I would toil like a navvy all day among the fowls, separating them when they fought, gathering in the eggs when they laid, chasing them across country when they got away, and even, if necessity arose, painting their throats with turpentine when they were stricken with roup. Then, after dinner, when the lamps were lit, and Mrs. Eucridge nursed Edwin and sewed, and Eucridge smoked cigars and incited the gramophone to murder mumbling mows, I would steal away to my bedroom and write, and write, and write, and go on writing till my fingers were numb and my eyes refused to do their duty. And when time had passed, I might come to feel that it was all for the best. A man must go through the fire before he can write his masterpiece. We learn in suffering what we teach in song. What we lose on the swings we make up on the roundabouts. Jerry Garnett, the man, might become a depressed, hopeless wreck, with the iron planted immovably in his soul, but Jeremy Garnett, the author, should turn out such a novel of gloom that strong critics would weep, and the public jostle for copies till Muty's doorway became a shambles. Thus might I some day feel that all this anguish was really a blessing, effectively disguised. But I doubted it. We were none of us very cheerful now at the farm. Even Euchridge's spirit was a little daunted by the bills which poured in by every post. It was as if the tradesmen of the neighborhood had formed a league, and were working it in concert. Or it may have been due to thought waves. Little accounts came not in single spies, but in battalions. The popular demand for the sight of the color of his money grew daily. Every morning at breakfast he would give us fresh bulletins of the state of mind of each of our creditors, and thrill us with the announcement that Whiteley's was getting cross and Harrod's jumpy, or that the bearings of Dawlish the grocer were becoming overheated. We lived in a continual atmosphere of worry. Chicken and nothing but chicken at meals, and chicken and nothing but chicken between meals had frayed our nerves. An air of defeat hung over the place. We were a beaten side, and we realized it. We had been playing an uphill game for nearly 2 months, and the strain was beginning to tell. Euchridge became uncannily silent. Mrs. Euchridge, though she did not understand, I fancy, the details of the matter, was worried because Euchridge was. Mrs. Beale had long since been turned into a soured cynic by the lack of chances vouchsafed her for the exercise of her art. And as for me, I have never since spent so profoundly miserably a week. I was not even permitted the anodyne of work. There seemed to be nothing to do on the farm. The chickens were quite happy, and only asked to be let alone and allowed to have their meals at regular intervals. And every day one or more of their number would vanish into the kitchen. Mrs. Beale would serve up the corpse in some cunning disguise, and we would try to delude ourselves into the idea that it was something altogether different. There was one solitary gleam of variety in our menu. An editor sent me a cheque for a set of verses. We cashed that cheque and trooped round the town in a body, laying out the money. We bought a leg of mutton and a tongue and sardines and pineapple chunks and potted meat and many other noble things, and had a perfect banquet. Mrs. Beale, with the scenario of a smile on her face, the first that she had worn in these days of stress, brought in the joint and uncovered it with an air. "Thank God," said Euchridge as he began to carve. It was the first time I had ever heard him say a grace, and if ever an occasion merited such a deviation from habit, this occasion did. After that, we relapsed into routine again. Deprived of physical labor, with the exception of golf and bathing, trivial sports compared with work in the fowl run at its hardest, I tried to make up for it by working at my novel. It refused to materialize. The only progress I achieved was with my villain. I drew him from the professor, and made him a blackmailer. He had several other social defects, but that was his profession. That was the thing he did really well. It was on one of the many occasions on which I had sat in my room, pen in hand, through the whole of a lovely afternoon, with no better result than a slight headache, that I bethought me of that little paradise on the Wear Cliff, hung over the sea and backed by green woods. I had not been there for some time, owing principally to an entirely erroneous idea that I could do more solid work sitting in a straight hard chair at a table than lying on soft turf with the sea wind in my eyes. But now the desire to visit that little clearing again drove me from my room. In the drawing-room below, the gramophone was dealing brassily with Mr. Blackman. Outside, the sun was just thinking of setting. The Wear Cliff was the best medicine for me. What does Kipling say? "And soon you will find that the sun and the wind, and the gin of the garden too, have lightened the hump, Camellias hump, the hump that is black and blue." His instructions include digging with a hoe and a shovel also, but I could omit that. The sun and the wind were what I needed. I took the upper road. In certain moods I preferred it to the path along the cliff. I walked fast. The exercise was soothing. To reach my favorite clearing, I had to take to the fields on the left, and strike downhill in the direction of the sea. I hurried down the narrow path. I broke into the clearing at a jog trot and stood panting. And, at the same moment, looking cool and beautiful in her white dress, Phyllis entered in from the other side. Phyllis, without the professor. End of chapter 16. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 17. Of a Sentimental Nature. She was wearing a Panama, and she carried a sketching block and camp stool. "Good evening," I said. "Good evening," said she. It is curious how different the same words can sound when spoken by different people. My good evening might have been that of a man with a particularly guilty conscience, caught in the act of doing something more than usually ignoble. She spoke like a rather offended angel. "It's a lovely evening," I went on pluckily. "Very." "The sun set?" "Yes." She raised a pair of blue eyes, devoid of all expression save a faint suggestion of surprise, and gazed through me for a moment at some object a couple of 1,000 miles away, and lowered them again, leaving me with a vague feeling there was something wrong with my personal appearance. Very calmly she moved to the edge of the cliff, arranged her camp stool, and sat down. Neither of us spoke a word. I watched her while she filled a little mug with water from a little bottle, opened her paint-box, selected a brush, and placed her sketching block in position. She began to paint. Now, by all the laws of good taste, I should before this have made a dignified exit. It was plain that I was not to be regarded as an essential ornament of this portion of the Wear Cliff. By now, if I had been the perfect gentleman, I ought to have been 1/4 of a mile away. But there is a definite limit to what a man can do. I remained. The sinking sun flung a carpet of gold across the sea. Phyllis' hair was tinged with it. Little waves tumbled lazily on the beach below. Except for the song of a distant blackbird running through its repertoire before retiring for the night, everything was silent. She sat there, dipping and painting, and dipping again, and never a word for me, standing patiently and humbly behind her. "Miss Derrick," I said. She half turned her head. "Yes." "Why won't you speak to me?" I said. "I don't understand you." "Why won't you speak to me?" "I think you know, Mr. Garnet." "It is because of the boat accident." "Accident?" "Episode," I amended. She went on painting in silence. From where I stood, I could see her profile. Her chin was tilted. Her expression was determined. "Is it?" I said. "Need we discuss it?" "Not if you do not wish it." I paused. "But," I added, "I should have liked a chance to defend myself. What glorious sunsets there have been these last few days. I believe we shall have this sort of weather for another month." "I should not have thought that possible." "The glass is going up," I said. I was not talking about the weather. It was dull of me to introduce such a worn-out topic. "You said you could defend yourself." "I said I should like the chance to do so." "You have it." "That's very kind of you, thank you." "Is there any reason for gratitude?" "Every reason." "Go on, Mr. Garnet. I can listen while I paint. Please sit down. I don't like being talked to from a height." I sat down on the grass in front of her, feeling as I did so that the change of position in a manner clipped my wings. It is difficult to speak movingly while sitting on the ground. Instinctively, I avoided eloquence. Standing up, I might have been pathetic and pleading. Sitting down, I was compelled to be matter-of-fact. You remember, of course, the night you and Professor Derrick dined with us? When I say dined, I use the word in a loose sense. For a moment, I thought she was going to smile. We were both thinking of Edwin. But it was only for a moment, and then her face grew cold once more, and the chin resumed its angle of determination. "Yes," she said. "You remember the unfortunate ending of the festivities?" "Well?" "If you recall that at all clearly, you will also remember that the fault was not mine, but Eucridge's." "Well?" "It was his behavior that annoyed Professor Derrick. The position then was this, that I was to be cut off from the pleasantest friendship I had ever formed." I stopped for a moment. She bent a little lower over the easel, but remained silent. "Simply through the tactlessness of a prize idiot." "I like Mr. Eucridge." "I like him too, but I can't pretend that he is anything but an idiot at times." "Well?" "I naturally wished to mend matters. It occurred to me that an excellent way would be by doing your father a service. It was seeing him fishing that put the idea of a boat accident into my head. I hoped for a genuine boat accident, but those things only happen when one does not want them, so I determined to engineer one." "You didn't think of the shock to my father." "I did. It worried me very much." "But you upset him all the same." "Reluctantly." She looked up, and our eyes met. I could detect no trace of forgiveness in hers. "You behaved abominably," she said. "I played a risky game, and I lost, and I shall now take the consequences. With luck I should have won. I did not have luck, and I am not going to grumble about it. But I am grateful to you for letting me explain. I should not have liked you to go on thinking that I played practical jokes on my friends. That is all I have to say. I think it was kind of you to listen. Good-bye, Miss Derrick." I got up. "Are you going?" "Why not?" "Please sit down again." "But you wished to be alone. Please sit down." There was a flush on the cheek turned towards me, and the chin was tilted higher. I sat down. To westward, the sky changed the hue of a bruised cherry. The sun had sunk below the horizon, and the sea looked cold and leaden. The blackbird had long since flown. "I am glad you told me, Mr. Garnet." She dipped her brush in the water. "Because I don't like to think badly of people." She bent her head over the painting. "Though I still think you behaved very wrongly, and I am afraid my father will never forgive you for what you did." Her father, as if he counted. "But you do?" I said eagerly. "I think you are less to blame than I thought you were at first." "No more than that?" "You can't expect to escape all consequences. You did a very stupid thing." I was tempted. The sky was a dull gray now. It was growing dusk. The grass on which I sat was wet with dew. I stood up. "Isn't it getting a little dark for painting?" I said. "Are you sure you won't catch cold? It's very damp." "Perhaps it is. And it is late, too." She shut her paint-box and emptied the little mug onto the grass. "May I carry your things?" I said. I think she hesitated, but only for a moment. I possessed myself of the camp-stool, and we started on our homeward journey. We were both silent. The spell of the quiet summer evening was on us. "And all the air a solemn stillness holds," she said softly. "I love this cliff, Mr. Garnet. It's the most soothing place in the world." "I found it so this evening." She glanced at me quickly. "You're not looking well," she said. "Are you sure you are not overworking yourself?" "No, it's not that." Somehow we had stopped, as if by agreement, and were facing each other. There was a look in her eyes I had never seen there before. The twilight hung like a curtain between us and the world. We were alone together in a world of our own. "It is because I had offended you," I said. She laughed a high, unnatural laugh. "I have loved you ever since I first saw you," I said doggedly. End of chapter 17. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 18. Euchridge Gives Me Advice. Hours after, or so it seemed to me, we reached the spot at which our ways divided. We stopped, and I felt as if I had been suddenly cast back into the workaday world from some distant and pleasanter planet. I think Phyllis must have felt much the same sensation, for we both became on the instant intensely practical and businesslike. "But about your father," I said. "That's the difficulty. He won't give us his consent? I'm afraid he wouldn't dream of it." "You can't persuade him?" "I can in most things, but not in this. You see, even if nothing had happened, he wouldn't like to lose me just yet, because of Nora." "Nora?" "My sister. She's going to be married in October. I wonder if we shall ever be as happy as they will." "Happy? They will be miserable compared with us. Not that I know who the man is." "Why, Tom, of course. You mean to say you really didn't know?" "Tom? Tom Chase?" "Of course." I gasped. "Well, I'm hanged," I said. "When I think of the torments I've been through because of that wretched man, and all for nothing, I don't know what to say." "You don't like Tom?" "Very much. I always did. But I was awfully jealous of him." "You weren't. How silly of you." "Of course I was. He was always about with you, and called you Phyllis, and generally behaved as if you and he were the heroine and hero of a musical comedy, so what else could I think? I heard you singing duets after dinner once. I drew the worst conclusions." "When was that? What were you doing there?" "It was shortly after Euchridge had got on your father's nerves, and nipped our acquaintance in the bud. I used to come every night to the hedge opposite your drawing-room window, and brood there by the hour." "Poor old boy." "Hoping to hear you sing. And when you did sing, and he joined in all flat, I used to swear. You'll probably find most of the bark scorched off the tree I leaned against." "Poor old man. Still, it's all over now, isn't it?" "And when I was doing my very best to show off before you at tennis, you went away just as I got into form." "I'm very sorry, but I couldn't know, could I? I thought you always played like that." "I know. I knew you would. It nearly turned my hair white. I didn't see how a girl could ever care for a man who was so bad at tennis." "One doesn't love a man because he's good at tennis." "What does a girl see to love in a man?" I inquired abruptly, and paused on the verge of a great discovery. "Oh, I don't know," she replied, most unsatisfactorily. And I could draw no views from her. "But about father," she said, "what are we to do?" "He objects to me. He's perfectly furious with you." "Blow, blow," I said, "thou winter wind, thou art not so unkind. He'll never forgive you, as man's ingratitude. I saved his life, at the risk of my own. Why, I believe I've got a legal claim on him. Who ever heard of a man having his life saved and not being delighted when his preserver wanted to marry his daughter? Your father is striking at the very root of the short story writer's little earnings. He mustn't be allowed to do it." "Jerry," I started. "Again," I said. "What?" "Say it again, do, please, now." "Very well. Jerry! It was the first time you had called me by my Christian name. I don't suppose you've the remotest notion how splendid it sounds when you say it. There is something poetical, almost holy about it. Jerry, please, say on. Do be sensible. Don't you see how serious this is? We must think how we can make Father consent. All right, I said. We'll tackle the point. I'm sorry to be frivolous, but I'm so happy I can't keep it all in. I've got you, and I can't think of anything else. Try. I'll pull myself together. Now, say on once more. We can't marry without his consent. Why not? I said, not having a marked respect for the professor's whims. Gretna Green is out of date, but there are registrars. I hate the very idea of a registrar, she said with decision. Besides— Well? Poor Father would never get over it. We've always been such friends. If I married against his wishes, he would— oh, you know— not let me near him again and not write to me. And he would hate it all the time he was doing it. He would be bored to death without me. Who wouldn't? I said. Because, you see, Nora has never been quite the same. She has spent such a lot of her time on visits to people that she and Father don't understand each other so well as he and I do. She would try and be nice to him, but she wouldn't know him as I do. And besides, she will be with him such a little now that she is going to be married. But look here, I said, this is absurd. You say your father would never see you again and so on if you married me. Why, it's nonsense. It isn't as if I were a sort of social outcast. We were the best of friends till that man Hawke gave me away like that. I know, but he's very obstinate about some things. You see, he thinks the whole thing has made him look ridiculous, and it will take him a long time to forgive you for that. I realized the truth of this. One can pardon any injury to oneself unless it hurts one's vanity. Moreover, even in a genuine case of rescue, the rescued man must always feel a little aggrieved with his rescuer when he thinks the matter over in cold blood. He must regard him unconsciously as the super regards the actor-manager, indebted to him for the means of supporting existence, but grudging him the limelight and the centre of the stage and the applause. Besides, everyone instinctively dislikes being under an obligation which they can never wholly repay. And when a man discovers that he has experienced all these mixed sensations for nothing, as the professor had done, his wrath is likely to be no slight thing. Taking everything into consideration, I could not but feel that it would require more than a little persuasion to make the professor bestow his blessing with that genial warmth with which we like to see in our fathers-in-laws elect. You don't think, I said, that time, the great healer, and so on, he won't feel kindlier disposed towards me, say, in a month's time? Of course he might, said Phyllis, but she spoke doubtfully. He strikes me, from what I have seen of him, as a man of moods. I might do something one of these days which would completely alter his views. We will hope for the best. About telling Father. Need we, do you think? I said. Yes, we must. I couldn't bear to think that I was keeping it from him. I don't think I've ever kept anything from him in my life. Nothing bad, I mean. You count this among your darker crimes, then? I was looking at it from Father's point of view. He will be awfully angry. I don't know how I shall begin telling him. Good heavens! I cried. You surely don't think I'm going to let you do that? Keep safely out of the way while you tell him? Not much. I'm coming back with you now, and we'll break the bad news together. No, not tonight. He may be tired and rather cross. We had better wait till tomorrow. You might speak to him in the morning." "Where shall I find him?" "He is certain to go to the beach before breakfast for a swim." "Good. I'll be there." "Euchridge," I said when I got back, "I want your advice." It stirred him like a trumpet blast. I suppose when a man is in the habit of giving unsolicited counsel to everyone he meets, it is as invigorating as an electric shock to him to be asked for it spontaneously. "Bring it out, laddie," he replied cordially. "I'm with you. Here, come along into the garden, and state your case." This suited me. It is always easier to talk intimately in the dark, and I did not wish to be interrupted by the sudden entrance of the hired man or Mrs. Beale, of which there was always a danger indoors. We walked down to the paddock. Euchridge lit a cigar. "Euchridge," I said, "I'm engaged." "What?" A huge hand whistled through the darkness and smote me heavily between the shoulder blades. "By Jove, old boy, I wish you luck. 'Pon my Sam I do. Best thing in the world for you. Bachelors are mere excrescences. Never knew what happiness was till I'm married. When's the wedding to be?" "That's where I want your advice. What you might call a difficulty has arisen about the wedding. It's like this. I'm engaged to Phyllis Derrick." "Derrick? Derrick?" "You can't have forgotten her. Good Lord, what eyes some men have! Why, if I'd only seen her once, I should have remembered her all my life." "I know now. Rather a pretty girl, with blue eyes." I stared at him blankly. It was not much good, as he could not see my face, but it relieved me. "Of course, yes," continued Euchridge. "She came to dinner here one night with her father, that fat little buffer." "As you were careful to call him to his face at the time, confound you! It was that started all the trouble." "Trouble? What trouble?" "Why, her father." "By Jove, I remember now. So worried lately, old boy, that my memory's gone groggy. Of course, her father fell into the sea, and you fished him out. Why, damn, it's like the stories you read." "It's also very like the stories I used to write. But they had one point about them which this story hasn't. They invariably ended happily, with the father joining the hero's and heroine's hands and giving his blessing. Unfortunately, in the present case, that doesn't seem likely to happen." "The old man won't give his consent?" "I'm afraid not. I haven't asked him yet, but the chances are against it." "But why? What's the matter with you? You're an excellent chap, sound in wind and limb. And didn't you tell me once that if you married, you came into a pretty sizable bit of money?" "Yes, I do. That part of it is all right." Euchridge's voice betrayed perplexity. "I don't understand this thing, old horse," he said. "I should have thought the old boy would have been all over you. Why, damn! I never heard anything like it. You saved his life. You fished him out of the water." "After chucking him in, that's the trouble." "You chucked him in?" "By proxy." I explained. Euchridge, I regret to say, laughed in a way that must have been heard miles away in distant villages in Devonshire. "You devil!" he bellowed. "'Pon my Sam, old horse, to look at you one would have never thought you had it in you." "I can't help looking respectable." "What are you going to do about it?" "That's where I wanted your advice. You're a man of resource. What would you do in my place?" Euchridge tapped me impressively on the shoulder. "Laddie," he said, "there's one thing that'll carry you through any mess." "And that is?" "Cheek, my boy, cheek. Gall. Nerve. Why, take my case. I never told you how I came to marry, did I? I thought not. Well, it was this way. It'll do you a bit of good, perhaps, to hear the story, for, mark you, blessings weren't going cheap in my case either. You know Milly's Aunt Elizabeth, the female who wrote that letter? Well, when I tell you that she was Milly's nearest relative, and that it was her consent I had to snaffle, you'll see that I was faced with a bit of a problem. "Let's have it," I said. Well, the first time I ever saw Milly was in a first-class carriage on the Underground. I'd got a third-class ticket, by the way. The carriage was full, and I got up and gave her my seat. And, as I hung suspended over her by a strap, damn, I fell in love with her then and there. You've no conception, laddie, how indescribably ripping she looked, in a sort of blue dress with a bit of red in it, and a hat with thingummies. Well, we both got out at South Kensington. By that time I was gasping for air and saw that the thing wanted looking into. I'd never had much time to bother about women, but I realized that this must not be missed. I was in love, old horse. It comes over you quite suddenly, like a tidal wave. I know, good heavens, you can't tell me anything about that. Well, I followed her. She went to a house in Thurlow Square. I waited outside and thought it over. I had to get into that shanty and make her acquaintance, if they threw me out on my ear. So I rang the bell. "Is Lady Lickenhall at home?" I asked. You spot the devilish cunning of the ruse, what? My asking for a female with a title was to make 'em think I was one of the upper 10. "How were you dressed?" I could not help asking. Oh, it was one of my frock-coat days. I'd been to see a man about tutoring his son, and by a merciful dispensation of Providence there was a fellow living in the same boarding-house with me who was about my build, and had a frock-coat, and he had lent it to me. At least, he hadn't exactly lent it to me, but I knew where he kept it, and he was out at the time. There was nothing the matter with my appearance. Quite the young duke, I assure you, laddie, down to the last button. "Is Lady Lickenhall at home?" I asked. "No," said the maid, "nobody that name here. This is Lady Lakenheath's house." So, you see, I had a bit of luck at the start, because the names were a bit alike. Well, I got the maid to show me in somehow, and once in, you can bet I talked for all I was worth. Kept up a flow of conversation about being misdirected and coming to the wrong house. Went away and called a few days later. Gradually wormed my way in. Called regularly, spied on their movements, met 'em at every theatre they went to, and bowed, and finally got away with Milly before her aunt knew what was happening, or who I was, or what I was doing, or anything. And what's the moral? Why, go in like a mighty rushing wind. Bustle 'em. Don't give 'em a moment's rest or time to think or anything. Why, if I'd given Milly's Aunt Elizabeth time to think, where should we have been? Not at Combe Regis together, I'll bet. You heard that letter, and know what she thinks of me now, on reflection. If I'd gone slow and played a timid waiting game, she'd have thought that before I married Milly instead of afterwards. I give you my honest word, laddie, that there was a time, towards the middle of our acquaintance, after she had stopped mixing me up with the man who had came to wind the clocks, when that woman ate out of my hand. Twice, on 2 separate occasions, she actually asked my advice about feeding her toy Pomeranian. Well, that shows you. Bustle 'em, laddie, bustle 'em. "Euchridge," I said, "you inspire me. You would inspire a caterpillar. I will go to the professor. I was going anyhow, but now I shall go aggressively. I will prize a father's blessing out of him, if I have to do it with a crowbar." "That's the way to talk, old horse. Don't beat about the bush. Tell him exactly what you want, and stand no nonsense. If you don't see what you want in the window, ask for it. Where did you think of tackling him?" "Phyllis tells me that he always goes for a swim before breakfast. I thought of going down tomorrow and waylaying him." "You couldn't do better, by Jove," said Ygritte suddenly. "I'll tell you what I'll do, laddie. I wouldn't do it for everybody, but I look on you as a favourite son. I'll come with you and help break the ice." "What?" "Don't you be under any delusion, old horse," said Ygritte paternally. "You haven't got an easy job in front of you, and what you'll need more than anything else, when you really get down to brass tacks, is a wise, kindly man of the world at your elbow, to whoop you on when your nerve fails, and generally stand in your corner and see that you get a fair show." "But it's rather an intimate business." "Never mind. Take my tip and have me at your side. I can say things about you that you would be too modest to say for yourself. I can plead your case, laddie. I can point out in detail all that the old boy will be missing if he gives you the missin' baulk. Well, that's settled then. About 8 tomorrow morning, what? I'll be there, my boy. A swim will do me good." End of chapter 18.